In this segment, we'll be putting up trusses. We've already done our plumbing and our lining. Not plumbing as in pipes, but getting our walls nice and straight. You notice we put in all our braces. We've checked our walls to make sure that they're nice and straight, and that's the lining aspect of it. We've also put up a couple of braces here for the first truss. So when we lean the first truss up, it's going to rest up against these braces here. That way, when we lean it up, we don't throw it off the side of the building. Plus, we can just tack it up against that, keeps it nice and plumb, and it'll give a good starting point for the rest of our trusses. Now, what I like to do is I like to lay out my first truss after my second truss and get a good layout mark, because trusses and rafters generally go on a 2-foot layout versus floor joists and ceiling joists, which usually go on 16-inch centers. So since these go on 2-foot centers, what you do again is just like we did before. You go 2 foot and then you come back 3/4 of an inch, all right? And that will give you your center line for your 2 foot on center. So I will be laying out my first truss, and again, what we do, just like we did on layout down here, was come to our layout point, which is 2 foot up here. It's 16 inches down there, it's 2 foot up here. And then I come back my 3/4 of an inch. So I make my mark. Now remember, just like when we did layout down below, our first set of blocks was a little bit smaller than our typical layout. In between our studs and in between our rafters is the same idea. The first block is going to be a little different than the rest of the blocks because we're going from the outside to the second truss here. So bear with me here. Again, just always remember the first block that you have is always going to be a little bit shorter than the rest of the blocks. So that's why I only lay out the second truss from the first one. So I come from the first one to the second one, lay that out, and then with trusses you generally get pre-cut blocks, and we'll just use those for layout. We'll put in a truss, we'll slide a block over, we'll nail that in place, and then the next truss will just slide right up against those blocks that are pre-cut that come from the truss company. But again, I always like to lay out the second truss on both my walls so I know exactly where it goes. And plus what I can do is I can go ahead and cut that first block for this wall, that wall, and the ridge. So I'll cut those 3 blocks, I'll get those nice and ready, and we can just keep on moving from there. All right, I cut my 3 blocks. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to nail the ridge block onto the truss so it's there for me so I don't have to climb up and try to do that. And then after I get the truss up and centered, I'll nail the 2 other blocks onto that first truss. Now these turned out to be 21 3/4 of an inch. The rest of them will turn out to be 22 and just shy of a 1/2 inch. So 22 and 7/16, something like that. That's what the pre-cut blocks generally will be. And those will we'll just use those from the company, and we'll just keep putting those in, and those will be our spacers for our trusses. So what I'm doing is I'm just starting off and putting my first block onto my first truss. And these plates here are called gang nails. What you really want to be aware of is that they have a bunch of little fingers that are really sharp on them. Just be careful around them, because if you catch your hand or your knee or something on them, it'll really rip you apart. It's not something you want to do, so just be careful. But the good thing about them is they're very easy to put a nail through. So don't be shy about nailing right through those gang nails, because they have little holes and they're not very thick metal, so you can pound a nail right through them, just like I did right here. In my younger years, back when I was in my early 20s, we were putting trusses up on a house just after Thanksgiving dinner, and it was a house I was building for myself, and my brother was helping me and another friend, and we were in a real rush. and it was a wet, rainy evening, and we shouldn't have probably been out there in the first place, but we were eager to do it. Well, I happened to catch myself on one of these gang nails, and this is why I'm telling you about it, because it took me right off the plate and hung me off the floor. And I finally fell off of it, but this is what it did to me. From there to there, it opened up my hand. And it wasn't a terribly bad injury, but it sure caught my attention and took a lot of stitches. But it could have been a lot worse. If there had been a vein there or something, I would have been in much worse trouble. So take it from me, a gang nail isn't something that you want to mess with. And especially if you see a gang nail that's peeled up on a corner where it's peeled over and those little teeth are sticking out, pound it back in, pound it over before you forget about it, and it gets you in trouble. Now, working with trusses, like many things, it's always good to have a couple of people helping you. All right, we have our first truss up, and before I do anything else, what I want to do is I just want to keep it steady. I have it roughly in the place I want it to be. So I'll just tack it and hold it in place. And then what I want to do is I want to see how it's lined up with this outside wall here and how it's lined up with that outside wall there. So I just want to center it. Oftentimes with trusses, they may be built a little bit long, they may be built a little bit short. So you just have to work with them and get them as close as possible. That means that sometimes your tails may be a little bit different, and you'll work that out once you put on your fascia board. But for now, what we'll try to do is we'll try to center this one as center as we can based on this bottom chord of this truss here, such that the bottom chord, the end of it, is equidistant between that wall and this wall. We'll just make sure that this truss lines up equally on both those walls. All right, what you see with this bottom chord is this bottom chord here lines up very well with the end of this wall, even though that the truss is up in the air a little bit. These end trusses are built very rigid, and sometimes it's hard to get them down tight. Don't worry about that so much. We just have to nail them in place. So we'll do our best to get them down, 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 down. But my big plan here is to make sure that the bottom chord, the very end of the bottom chord, is flush with this wall. Hopefully it's the very same on that side. If it's a 1/4 inch over, I'll move this over 1/8 of an inch. If it's a 1/2 inch over, I'll move this over a 1/4 of an inch. So you just so it's equal. Well, I notice that my double plate here is in a little bit, and my lower plate is out a little bit. But in general, my bottom chord lines up pretty nice with the outside of this wall. So I believe I'm just going to keep it in place right where it's at. And since I'm happy with it, I'm going to stick a toenail right through my gang nail. Put a little pressure down on my truss. And do a few of those along the way here. When you're toenailing like this, sometimes it'll push the board in. Don't be shy. Just hit it once or twice and knock it back out. The toenails stay in there just fine. You can adjust it all you want, just like that. So what I'll do is I'll just carry on this way to about the halfway point, then I'll go all the way over to the other end. I'll try to pull that down as best I can, toenail it, and then work back. You can also go down and rent a scaffolding from a rental place and roll it around to work. But generally that works well when you have a bigger area. This is such a small area that we have so many braces that the scaffolding would be a little bit tough to move around. But it certainly makes it a lot easier to get a lot more done in a small space when you have some sort of scaffolding to walk back and forth on. Now I'll move over to the other end. And we see how high up in the air this is. What we'll do is we'll do our best to pull it down. We don't have much choice in the matter. So I'll do a fairly vertical toenail. And put as much weight on it as I can as I toenail it. Well, it's not all the way down, but at least I pulled it down quite a bit. Before it decides to come back up, we'll toenail it down as much as we can. You'll find that these end trusses are a lot more work than the regular trusses, because the regular trusses just land on 2 points. And the rule of thumb is, if you think 3 nails are good, 4 nails are better. It's also a good idea to wear a hat when you're working around braces, because getting up and down on ladders, you're going to bonk your head a few times, and it's nice to have a hat on to protect your head.
Home Improvement Camp. Have at it.